Warning, due to some language and subject matter, listener discretion is advised.
If you've been a regular listener of this podcast since it started, you are well aware how much focus has been placed on COVID-19 in the last year and the impact that it has had not only in how we socialize, but on our overall mental health. The other aspect of this show that I've been really proud about is the ever-changing challenge of self-improvement, not only for me, but for you, our listener. My next guest is a clinical psychologist, an executive coach. He trains in the martial arts, and he finds time to sing in a heavy metal band. He's also a fellow podcaster and hosts the show Hardcore Humanism with Dr. Mike, sporting a very impressive roster of names you will all recognize. I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Michael Friedman to the show today. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Caught on the Mic. Dr. Mike, how the hell are you, my friend?
I am doing well, sir. How are you?
Oh, I'm fantastic. We were just chatting a few minutes ago about where we're at on this planet. You're calling in from New Jersey. I'm calling you from Lincoln, Nebraska. So things are good where we're at, right?
Worlds are colliding.
Well, I'm going to kind of frame this real quick. You are a clinical psychologist. You are an executive coach. You are a contributor to Psychology Today in your column Brick by Brick. You train in the martial arts and you find time to sing in a band. Are you still singing in a band?
I actually have a new project now that is a more extreme metal project. So I am technically starting to, it's been, I would say, I don't know if it's been 10 years quite. It might not be quite that long, but since I've worked on anything specific, and now we got something going on with a buddy of mine up the block who introduced me to Clutch, actually.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So we were at the bus stop, and he had this, with our kids, and he had this look on his face. I'm just like, what happened to you? Like, what are you? And he just goes, Clutch. And I'm like, I'm like, Clutch what? I go, you clutching what? I'm totally unfamiliar with the situation. He's like, Clutch is coming to town. And I said to him, I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but I have to find out. And I'm going to interview Clutch. At this point, I didn't know it was going to be Neil Fallon. I was like, I'm going to interview Clutch, and you're going to give a fan quote, because I got to figure out what is this that is making a middle-aged father, like this, like giddy like this. And we did that. And then eventually I actually interviewed Jesse from Killswitch Engage, and Clutch was opening for them at a show down in Asbury Park. And I was like, we gotta go. And I saw Clutch for the first time, and it was the only show that I've ever been to where we were walking along the boardwalk and there were people in Clutch shirts, like in droves. Like, you never see that where people wear the shirt. And I'm like, okay, something's. And can I tell you, it was all the hype was absolutely deserved. I was like, this is it, man. I'm just like, this is exactly what I need in my life. And I told Neil that story when we interviewed for the podcast this past year. I was like, dude, the magic is so well deserved, like the effect that they have on people. So anyway, so we after we did, so then we started being like, we should just do something. It's the pandemic, and now we're meddling. So I'm doing more extreme metal than I think I've ever done before.
It's funny because my wife's cousin, he was just over here the other day, and he collects vinyl, and I'm into vinyl too. And I'm like, what have you picked up recently? And he goes, I just picked up the entire Clutch discography on vinyl. And I'm like, well, shit, there you go, man. There you go.
Totally. That's totally money well spent. Although I must say that as good as they are on their recordings, live is just where they really, like, I feel like they separate themselves. They really get, someone asked me like a while back, like, what's my favorite kind of music? And I never really understood. And then about 20 years ago, I saw Bruce Springsteen on the Rising tour. And this guy was like, he must have been in his late 50s, with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, millions of dollars. He's playing in Giant Stadium where he's a god. And I swear this guy goes out and plays the show like he's 17 years old. And if he doesn't get it right, he's not making it out of his parents' basement in Jersey. Now, when people say like, what kind of music you like? I was like, I like that kind of music. I like the kind of music where the artist understands how sacred this moment is, whether it's 50,000, 100,000, 2 people, they get how important this moment is. If you are that, that's the kind of music that I want to hear. I don't care what the genre is. I just want to have that feeling like I am sharing this important moment. And Clutch, 100%. Like Neil, they just get it. As soon as I heard it, I was like, oh man, you guys just get it 100%. Like they know how to have fun without being silly. You know what I mean? Without making it kind of like a joke. Like they don't parody themselves, even though they do a lot of like, you know, they keep that, you know, like and it's in the sound too. Like they keep that heavy blues bass in the sound that just is like, okay, yeah.
That's
Thank
awesome.
You. Thank you. You know, no need to tell me anything further. I get it. I'm yours. Do with me what you want. It's just like I loved it. So anyway, so we're like, let's make music together. My buddy Frank.
You mentioned you've interviewed a few of these people. So what I want to talk about a little bit is your show, your podcast, Hardcore Humanism with Dr. Mike. You have an impressive array of people that you've interviewed for this show. I just listened to the Jacoby Shaddix episode last night. My wife was out of town, and that was such a timely episode. And I know you'd recorded it a while back, but it was such a timely episode and things of relevance in regard to that. So explain to our listeners what the philosophy of hardcore humanism is.
Hardcore humanism is it's a little bit of a play on hardcore punk. And so, but there's kind of a double meaning there. And so it's based basically on humanistic psychology. And one of the things that I found very kind of both interesting, but at times disturbing about how I saw a lot of psychology playing out was that it always seemed as though there was kind of like, this is why you're crazy. You know, maybe you have a cognitive distortion, or you have an irrational thought, or you have unconscious conflict, or you have a biological abnormality or whatever. It was always like something that was like, this is why this person is not well. And, you know, I'm very respectful of all those. It doesn't mean that everybody takes that perspective, and I'm obviously like, you know, people come at it from different ideas, et cetera. But I never really felt comfortable with it because I always felt like it was a little bit more stigmatizing of people who struggle with mental health issues. And the only approach that really seemed very much against that was humanistic psychology, where the idea was that, you know, people are good, people want to grow, people, you know, and our job is to kind of pull the weeds away from what gets in their way of being, you know, their best and actualized self. And, you know, so I think that over time, one of the things that I found from playing music and, you know, just sort of how that filled me up and kind of invigorated me was that all of the musicians kind of seemed to have 4 steps that they always took, which was, number one, when the whole world told them to go right, they decided to go left. You know, everyone's like, you should get a quote unquote real job. You should be a lawyer. You should be this, you should be that. And it's like, no, this is how I want to dress. This is what I want to listen to. This is how I want to live my life. And they found a purpose in music. And they worked super, super hard. You know, even the bands that, you know, got labeled as being like party bands, whatever, when you start to scratch below the surface, these are people who are working nonstop at their craft, at promotion. And then they built a community around to support themselves. So those 4 steps of basically like pulling away all the barriers and the judgments that society puts on people so that you can find your purpose and work to achieve it and build a community that supports that. That's the essence of what we try to do with hardcore humanism as a therapy and coaching program. And so it's kind of like hardcore humanism, because it's like, well, humanism, you're going to be empathic, we're going to be more empathic. You're going to be open-minded, we're going to be more open-minded. We're going to even think bigger about what you could do. And we're going to help you work really hard. We're going to use, I was, trained in more behavioral approaches. So we're going to use also behavioral approaches to help you get that. We're not just going to say, hey, you have some ideas. Great. We're going to help you do it. But then it's also a little bit of a nod to the humanism of some of these subgenres that have been maligned, whether it's metal or hip hop or hardcore. There's these situations where the world rejected those approaches, those cultures, those people. And they just kind of said, well, okay, if you don't accept us in your world, we're going to build a world of our own. And you take those three genres and they've together, influenced everything, and to an extent. You have even like people who are more popular mainstream artists, like somebody like Post Malone is doing things with Ozzy, is like, when he has a chance, doing, a whole night of Nirvana covers. You think about Nirvana's history with the Melvins and Dave Grohl coming out of DC hardcore, and you're like, yeah, whether it's Duff McKagan and, coming from hardcore and being Guns N' Roses, or William Duvall now and Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, the guys coming from Green River, Flea coming from Fear. I think Flea came from Fear. I might have that wrong, but whatever hardcore band he was in, even anything in rock, hip hop is obviously taken over, and metal is huge now. So I just have so much admiration for people who are able to withstand that pressure and be who they are. And that's what I want the people who I work with to experience, whether or not it's to be okay with the fact that they struggle with mental illness, or because of the things that they want to do or who they want to be. And I see my job as starting or helping them on that process, helping them on that journey. And I love, and so the podcast is really designed to just put as many people in front of everyone that have gone through that. And hopefully people hear it, somebody like Jacoby, Jacoby is fantastic. I think that was the third time I've met with him. And every time I come out being like, man, this guy, just being willing to talk about slipping up his sobriety.
Right.
He doesn't have to do that. He's already him. He doesn't have to step out like that and share that kind of a painful detail in his life. But, how many people are probably also slipped with their addiction during the pandemic, who are now maybe something, maybe I will get help, I'm not going to just keep it a secret, maybe I don't have to be ashamed of it. And, that to me is the biggest win. I love talking to the people. I love having the conversations, I get something out of it. I hope people are entertained by it and love the conversations. But the real big win is if someone then walks away and is like, I'm going to do something different, because I heard, that conversation with Jacoby, I'm going to maybe start my path to sobriety. That to me is when people write and email and say that that's what happened for them. I'm like, oh man, this is just so cool, because we have a lot to learn from our rock stars that I don't think we do, quite frankly.
Yeah. And a lot of the people that you've mentioned are kind of gatekeepers of these subgenres and their own little movements, but they're also very transparent and not afraid to be vulnerable. And I think that makes them stronger thought leaders. And correct me if I'm wrong, but just being out in the open about that. And that's something that's changing in society as a whole, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think musicians are, I'm going to be writing something about that later in the week. I think is musicians, I think, are such powerful mental health advocates because they went through the process that we were just talking about, but they've also spent their lives exploring the depths of their experience and figuring out a way to share it. Listen, I like to think that as a psychologist that I, help as, many people as I can. And hopefully a few even feel like they've been quote unquote saved to a degree, but how many people have been saved by their favorite album, that album or that band when you're like alone and you're a kid or you're a teenager, even as an adult, and you feel like no one gets you and no one understands what you're going through. And you listen to an album and you're kind of like, I don't even know exactly what they're saying. I may not even know all the words, but like, there's something that connects, and just knowing that there's someone out there who you can connect with, even if it's someone you don't know, can be the difference. I personally think, obviously there's not studies on this, but I think that's the difference a lot of times between people living or dying. You can't run that study correctly, obviously. But I think that, just like, you think like how many people have been saved by music, whether from playing it or just being fans or whatever it is. And so, to me, I kind of feel like, have we learned everything we can from our musicians? Like, I haven't, like, personally,
right.
So I feel like if I get the chance, I want to know how they do things in whatever way they feel comfortable, and that to me it feels like it's just it's so enjoyable. I feel like it's such a privilege, and then getting a chance to like talk to somebody like you about it, just like, this is just, the whole thing just feels really good.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's different lanes on the same highway, but another class of people that I think fall in the same category are martial artists and fighters as well, because there's a certain level of discipline that comes with being vulnerable and being transparent about where your mental state is. And, I'm a huge UFC guy. Like, I can talk about mixed martial arts the way most people talk about their favorite football team. And, coming off of a year like 2020 and COVID-19, that was the only sport that was running there for a while. So it got elevated, and some of these fighters got elevated in the process. And I think musicians and fighters do kind of carry similar, I don't want to say baggage, but a lot of life experience. And that proves very helpful to the rest of us when we hear that, because we can point our finger and say, hey, I can relate to that. I went through that same exact thing. And it somewhat normalizes these feelings that are otherwise abnormal to us.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things, though, that's very tough, so for example, if you look at almost any study of music therapy, or art therapy, it all shows that people have better mental and physical well-being from it. I mean, it's like, getting enough sleep, drinking water, vegetables, exercise, and like doing something creative. You know what I mean? Like, it's that robust and ridiculously consistent, finding. And yet, when you listen to a lot of, and the same thing with exercise, it's like, getting a half hour, an hour of exercise is so amazing, especially if you find something like whether I've in the past taken Taekwondo or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it's so fun. But one of the things that I think is tough is that, but that's different than being someone who's got something bursting out of you that's so overwhelming and so uncontrollable that it needs to come out in, like, whether it's in creativity or in like competitive, like I don't, as an example, like have any sort of sense of like a desire to like dominate someone or to be the best in that kind of a way, especially to the extent of being better than someone. Like I would much rather, like, instead of like a fight, like I would just rather be like, let's like train together and both come out of it feeling like it was great. And like, who cares? Like, it's like, so, but I think that what then happens is that people who are musicians or UFC fighters, when they struggle, I think that there is a disconnect, because I think that, and I think it's an unfortunate one, because, I've often said we have this like kind of abusive relationship with our rock stars. And I think it's similar for our UFC fighters. Like, we cheer them on as they're winning and we feel good in their glow, but then we kind of, if they slip or like, it's kind of like, oh, you're great. But like, you did something after the bell. Now you're like it's like, or you took performance enhancing drugs. I'm not condoning any of those behaviors, but what I am sort of suggesting is that, like, we sort of cheer people on right until they get to the point where they make a mistake, which is almost entirely predictable based on what's being nurtured. You know what I mean? And then we just turn, and then they get destroyed in the media or by fans. And I think, I personally feel like that's such a dangerous thing, because what I feel like it's teaching all of us is that go for go for what you want, but if you slip up, you're going to be like an outcast in some ways. And I kind of feel like it's teaching people to not really go for their dreams. And I wish, and I think that there is becoming more compassion, more empathy, and more understanding of, as these people share their stories about like how hard they work and how much they have to go through, and like playing in pain. And a musician's life is horrible. Like, if you really look at, I mean, it's almost singularly designed to destroy mental and physical health. If I were going to destroy someone's mental and physical well-being, I would make them a touring musician, especially at like lower levels where you're like, you're living, you're staying in like not as great, traveling in a van, like, you don't have the amenity, it's just, and being a UFC fighter is worse in some ways, because you have all of the potential head trauma.
Right.
So it's like, I mean, and I think that if we're going to cheer people on, I think this is very much the same with hockey. It's like, if we're going to cheer on, our enforcers, then like we got to think about like, well, what's happening? Like, what are we cheering on, and how are we taking care of them afterwards? And obviously, these are adults, they make their own choices, but something wrong there that I'm hoping, as more people come out and share their stories, people are like, hey, like, could we do this a little bit differently? Could we cheer on people when we're doing like what we hope for, but then maybe not be a little bit more understanding and sort of appreciative, like, hey, you like, obviously not if they're like hurting people or something like that, but if they're struggling with depression, or they're struggling with addiction, or they find themselves not having as much money, because they spent it all and they didn't realize it, just sort of be like, just, these people gave us a lot. Like, you don't have to like, give money or give money, but maybe just not write like a horrible thing on a website about them, or like, whatever, like just something to like let them know, like, hey, we appreciate the whole person, the whole journey, not just like when you're doing well, then I'm hoping like, then people will feel more empowered to go searching for what they want in the world, because they're not afraid if they slip up that everybody's gonna, just like laugh at them or whatever, like, kind of destroy them.
And this is going to sound like a ridiculous comparison, but a very good exercise in seeing this play out in real time is pro wrestling. Okay. Mm-hmm. Especially pro wrestling in the age of the internet. The fans will demand that a pro wrestler, and I'm talking like WWE type wrestling, fans will demand that a pro wrestler gets put over or pushed to the top. And then once that wrestler gets to the top, the WWE, the AEW, whatever wrestling organization gives the fans what they want, the fans immediately shit on the guy that they were trying to push to the top. And it's really crazy to see that play out in real time. But I think it kind of aligns with what you were saying, is we do really have to think about the long-term outcome. Don't ask for something if you don't truly want it, Well,
it's also just, I think it's looking at people as a whole human being. And that's right. One of the things that I do like about more musicians and UFC fighters, like stepping up and talking about like the totality of them as a human being. And I think that then it's sort of, again, like when you dehumanize someone, it's easy to shit all over them.
Right.
And when you humanize someone, look, there's a lot of people out there who are like in different arenas. They like, like people who like work their whole lives and like work 3 jobs so that they could, afford college. And then like, for some reason, maybe had to drop out. And then if everybody was like, oh, like, okay, so we're going to look at you, you thought you were so great, whatever. And, you couldn't make it. And it's sort of like, no, like, that's not what we should do. We should be like, kind of encouraging people and congratulating them on what they did. And then be like, hey, if you're struggling, like, how can we help you? It's like, it's wonderful. And that's why I like what I do, both professionally as a psychologist and then kind of semi-professionally, but mostly amateurly as a, podcaster or writer. It's like, I just love the idea of being in that. Let's look at you as a whole human being and let's like just figure out how to make this work. Like, here's a way of looking at yourself. You look at yourself in terms of like there's shame and there's like things that you don't like and whatever. It's like, okay, you're allowed to have that, but maybe here's a little bit of a different perspective. And can we pull away again all those weeds that get in the way of you feeling like here's my purpose in life, and I'm going to go for it. And even if I don't get it like all the way, so what? Like how many, like how many people spent their lives wanting to be like a professional athlete? And it's like, wherever you land in that, there's still ways of that, living in you, like in some ways, and playing out in your life. And, just, I hope more and more people like listen to, these different, the musicians, fighters, whoever they are. And they kind of like, all right, I see myself a little bit. Maybe I'll take a shot, and even if I don't do it as much as I want, or it doesn't work as well, it's okay. It's good even,
Absolutely. So after a year like 2020 and the COVID-19 pandemic, do you notice certain patterns emerging in behavioral health and, psychology as a whole, with some of the people that you're interacting with, more like the creative types and the people that are used to having a public persona that weren't able to have it over the course of the last year?
I mean, I hope the biggest thing that's happening now is that people, whether the people who are struggling with mental health issues or practitioners or the public or media, whatever it is, sort of be like, look, if this has taught us anything, it's that people's mental health issues are real. They're not based on, always, sometimes there's different things that are happening in people's lives where they are, confusing things maybe here or there. But for the most part, people are just looking at things that are happening in their lives, real struggles. People have real biological predispositions to get anxious or depressed or to have addiction, and they have real stress in their lives. And it's not always clear how to cope with it. And I hope that people like recognize that, when someone has quote unquote, not quote unquote, but someone's like struggles with depression, it's like having diabetes or having heart disease or having asthma, and we should think about it as like, oh, this is someone who's got a biological vulnerability. And when there are certain stressors, it pops up, and we should give people the same compassion that we do, I hope we do, to people with cancer, people with heart disease, people with diabetes. I mean, if we don't give, if we were not giving those people compassion, then that's a whole nother problem. I think, but most people are much more compassionate towards what they see as quote unquote physical health problems, and less so towards mental health problems. And to see, no, these are people, in fact, if you've got a mental health issue and you're still getting up every day, like Sean Colvin, who's a really powerful mental health advocate, and a wonderful musician, just said like some days it would take everything to get from the bed to the sink, that was like, and, some people are being like, oh, why can't you do this? And I think like people who have mental health issues, we're still getting up every day, still making it to work, maybe sometimes not, like still trying to meet their responsibilities. It's like, the people being like, oh, you're weak. It's like, no, there's a strength there. And, what the problem is that we as a society haven't figured out how to help you do this, and so that's what I'm hoping is really going to change, because so many people now, unfortunately, are experiencing mental health issues and maybe have an insight into how it happens. They thought of themselves as quote unquote normal and not having any quote unquote issues. And all of a sudden they find themselves like panicking and depressed, and maybe like, turning to a bottle, or, like there's a lot of people, jack themselves up on like caffeine and, Adderall, like during the day. And then they, go to bed with pot and liquor, and it's like, and again, I don't judge or begrudge anyone who does that. And I don't hope that people suffer so that they develop empathy. But I'm hoping that one of the positive things that comes out of all of this horrific stuff that's happening is that there is more of a sense of like, this is how it happens for people. We're just seeing it a lot more concentrated. You know, those people who you used to think are like, oh, they're depressed. Like, what's their problem? Why can't they get their act together? It's like, well, a lot of us are seeing now how hard it is to get our act together, you know, and that's what I'm really hoping is the big change, is because I think that we're just beginning to see the mental health. I mean, there was already a mental health crisis, but the mental health pandemic that's coming from all of this, I don't think we've even seen the tip of. There's people whose entire lives have been disrupted and they have no idea how they're going to get back into it.
Agreed. That's you led me into my next question perfectly, because that's one of the things my friends and I have discussed, that now things are starting to return to somewhat a sense of normalcy. We're starting to get used to not wearing the masks again, which has just been really weird for me personally. I'll walk out of my office and I'll start reaching in my pocket and be like, oh shit. Oh wait, I'm vaccinated. I don't got to wear this thing anymore. But, one of the things that we all kind of feel is like this post-pandemic blues, or this post-pandemic blase feeling. And we kind of wonder if did we acclimate our lives to the life that became as a result of COVID-19? And, you know, how do we all bounce back from that? And I think you hit the nail on the head. It's like, it's actualizing what we just went through, and maybe some of the skeletons we had buried in the closet when life was quote unquote normal.
Yeah. I mean, I think that what happens is that most people don't think about what their purpose in life is. They just kind of, you know, they have some degree of, you know, whether it's luck or privilege or just, you know, someone's looking down on them and, you know, smiling, where they just kind of go about their lives and things happen and they're kind of like, oh, this feels meaningful. This feels fulfilling, but they're not necessarily doing it from a place of purpose. Like, the difference between meaning and purpose is one is passive, one is active. Like, so meaning is like after the fact, putting together like what does this all mean and making sense of it. Purpose is waking up in the morning with the intention of making certain things happen, you know, like developing or creating meaning, if you will. And I think that what happens when things are going well, people are lucky enough that it all kind of works out, sort of, you know. It's like, but what happens when your life is disrupted, whether it's from a mental health issue or pandemic or physical health issue, is that one of the first things that goes is your purpose, because you're in pain or whatever. You don't have time to think about all of that. And so then the problem, though, of what happens is that when you are feeling a little bit better, you don't necessarily remember to reassert your purpose in life. And you don't even necessarily do it when you're not feeling well. And so I think that what's happening for a lot of people now is they're just kind of disoriented, in part because they're not sure about some very specific things, like, should I wear a mask? Should I not? Should I go to this place? Should I not? They're not used to interacting with people. Like, you know, I spent a year plus not doing the things that I love to do the most, which is going to clubs with tons of people packed in and listening to music, or rolling around on the floor with someone like sweating all over the place with jujitsu, or just walking up on the street and hugging people. You know, these are things that I, you know, the people I know. I don't just walk up to random strangers, you know, but like, you know, it's sort of, now we have to like reprogram all of that. But I still think that the number one thing that happens is like, what, you know, like what am I doing here? My whole life just got uprooted. What does that mean for who I am and what I'm trying to do in my life? And I think it's going to take people a while to say, you know, because what I always say to people is your purpose in life doesn't come or go. That you have control over. You don't always have control over how it manifests or how you pursue it or the processes by which you go about it, but you always can have it, even if you're not working it at a certain time. But that's a hard thing to keep in mind when you're like, well, my purpose used to be my job and now I can't do my, you know, my purpose in life was, you know, to, you know, create a wonderful environment for people to eat the food that I cook. And now I can't do that. You know, my purpose used to be to play live music in front of, you know, fans who enjoyed it. People can't do that, you know, on and on and on, you know? And so it's hard then to sort of figure out, again, not only just getting yourself settled in terms of economics and physical and mental well-being, but then like the depth of personal kind of examination and just like, okay, so what do I want to do in this life? And I think, people will eventually get back to thinking that way. And but that's one of the things that I think is shattered, quite frankly. I mean, the pandemic, it does everything to shatter our purpose, which is, again, I think another reason why the mental health crisis is just going to continue, unfortunately.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you have a general sense of optimism in the long term, in the macro instead of the micro, because it probably will get a little bit. It'll probably get a little bit worse before it gets better, I'm sure.
I'm not like a big believer, quite frankly. Like I think I see optimism versus pessimism as not like a things are going to be good, things are going to be bad kind of way. I think it's more just like, I think for me, it's a matter of function. So in other words, like if you're optimistic and therefore you don't, I don't judge people who do things in different ways, but let's say you're optimistic, like, oh, I'm going to be okay. So I don't have to get a vaccine, wear a mask, like, special social distancing. That may work. It may not. But to me, that's not a positive outcome, if you will, of optimism. You know what I mean? That's something that's a little bit of a riskier outcome. And again, I don't judge people who make those decisions. I personally don't make those decisions. Whereas there might be someone who's more pessimistic, who not only is going to be really careful about social distancing, getting a vaccine, wearing a mask, but also is the kind of person who makes sure every year to get like a full blood work done and get like a checkup and go to the dentist. And so to me, it's not a matter of, are you optimistic, like things are going to be good, or are you pessimistic, you're worried things are going to be bad. It's what's the function of that behavior, of that process in terms of what you do, and then examining the outcomes and just sort of saying like, okay, like my system now, my functional system is, I am thinking this is who I am. These are the things that I want to do. And let me just look at the results and then like adjusting accordingly. So it's not, again, to me, it's a big part of hardcore humanism is, for lack of a better saying it, rejecting the sort of theories, are people positive or people negative. You could be like a completely pessimistic, negative, you think everything's going to like not work out, but that motivates you to, work really hard and save your money and like, make sure that your kids, like, college education was paid for like yesterday, and, always checking up on your family and all this kind of stuff. So, I think that's a big thing that our field has done a little bit of a disservice, is making it seem like somehow being positive or optimistic is inherently good, whereas being negative I forget what I just said, being optimistic or positive versus being like negative and pessimistic, because it makes the people who are inherently pessimistic not feel like they have a lane, like, if you want to be skeptical, like whatever, but within you, looking, just what I would encourage everyone to do is sort of like be you, as long as you're not hurting anybody else, like, and just look at the results. Like, look at the results. Are you living out your purpose? Are the things that you're saying are going to happening based on what you're seeing? And are you, and look at everything. That's sometimes something that we sometimes do, like, like a lot of people, when they look at like their drinking behavior, they don't look at everything that's happening. They're like, what's the problem? Like, I didn't do this. It's like, okay, like if you want to drink, I'm not going to judge you for that. But are you looking at every single thing that's happening? Like, are you looking at the fact that, like, you're drinking when you're going out and you're kind of getting drunk and you're not meeting people who you want to be romantically connected with, and you're kind of not understanding why? That was something, quite frankly, that I think I went through. And that's how I can see it in people who are in their teens, their 20s or their 30s, is you kind of like, are you really sitting down thinking about, like, so so look, you want to meet like a significant other, right? And so your idea is, you're gonna, you're gonna pregame at 8. You're gonna go somewhere to a party and do shots at 9. Then you're gonna have drinks at 10. Then you're gonna like show up at a club at like 11 or 12 and like what, and you're gonna be like a stranger. And then it's like, okay, so that's your model for like meeting a significant other. If that's your model for like having a really fun time, yeah. But how many people then wake up the next day and they're like, I'm just so lonely, and how come I didn't meet anybody? And like, well, it's like, well, like, look, so I don't judge the first part. I did that for years, but I also know that I woke up a lot of times and I was sort of like, God, like I see all these like, couples and they're happy, like, and I'm like living this like wraith, like, life. And so that's what I would just say to, everybody is like, don't worry about, are you doing things the way you should or shouldn't, optimistic, pessimistic. If you like to do this, you like to do that, that's not the issue. Just make sure that who you are and what you're about, that what I will always say to people is that make sure that your ambitions match your efforts, match your evaluation. So is what you want, what you're doing, and then how you're evaluating yourself, like, and if those things line up and you got a system in place, then great, whatever it is. But a lot of times we don't, because we haven't thought it through.
What you're saying essentially is, instead of looking at it as optimism versus pessimism, look at it more like cause and effect.
Yeah. I think that's a very like, to me, I think one of the things that was very interesting about when I started to play music, because I started playing music when I was in my 30s. And one of the things that was just very interesting to me was, I had grown up in a place where the people who were into metal or punk or goth or whatever, they were called the Wallers. Like they would hang out at the wall behind we had a huge wall in our high school, and they would smoke and whatever. And I knew some of the people, but I didn't really hang out with them. And I was just kind of like what's going on there, And I judged, not intentionally, like I didn't say anything to anybody, but I just, in my own head, I kind of judged it. And then when I started in my 30s, I didn't realize that I can't sing, but I realized like screaming came more naturally to me. And so I started playing that kind of music, and I started dressing in black. And then all of a sudden I saw how people treated me. Like the world kind of opened up into two different camps. There were people like, hey, cool, you're doing something. What is that? And some people were like, oh, what are you doing? Like, it's like, and I'm very careful. That was a very powerful experience for me, because people who I had known my whole life, even like some were just like, oh my God, this is so awesome. Even if they didn't like the music, they were just like, I can't believe you're doing something different and new and good for you. And I have something that I do that's different, that's completely out of this realm, but I want to share it with you. And then some people were really judgmental. And that I think that a lot of people who like gravitate towards metal don't necessarily, or maybe like hardcore, don't look at the world at large and think like, hey, everything's going to just be great, or even like early hip hop, everything's going to be great. It's like, no, like actually I'm looking at the world and it's not going to be great. But what I'm choosing to do is I'm saying, I'm looking at this world that's not great, and I'm going to do something functional that's aimed at trying to make it okay for me, and it may be even great. And I think that to me is why the whole optimism pessimism thing is such an important thing, that everybody feels like they have a lane to live a healthy, functional life. And you don't have to, if you don't think the world, I mean, there's a lot of reasons not to think that the world is great. So why on earth would I tell somebody like, hey, you need to think everything's going to be great, in order for it to be great? It's like that to me, that doesn't make any sense. I just want to see you doing things that optimize your chances of being the person you want to be, whatever that is.
Oh man, that's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. So when I led off with this interview, I said you had a very impressive roster of people that you've had the pleasure of interviewing on your show, Hardcore Humanism with Dr. Mike. You can find it on all the major podcast platforms. I was listening to it on Alexa last night, just for those of you that are listening along to this, and hopefully I didn't just trigger my Alexa in the room. But who is your favorite musician to interview so far?
It's to be honest, like it's it's kind of weird because I know that in theory, I'm not just saying this because I don't want to like pick someone or like whatever. It really is like, I feel like, not, you know, obviously there's an exception here and there, but like everyone's got something that I just found so amazing that it's just different for different people. You know what I mean? So like, like I'm talking like, there's, and some of these are people who weren't like Steve. I'll tell you, like some of these are people who weren't necessarily even on the podcast, but like Steve Albini was the first person we had. And the reason why I just love interviewing Steve is because he, a few years ago, the entire way I looked at the world by talking about how he saw like different kinds of businesses.
Right.
There's a business that exists to do a thing and it may or may not make money. And there's businesses that exist to make money. And I think his whole premise was that musicians who go from like maybe like an independent label to a major label are stepping from one world to another and not realizing it, and not realizing that all the context and all the has changed. Or whether that, people believe that is not, it's up to people to decide for themselves. But that changed the entire way I practiced psychology, because it was the way that like the whole idea that when people are going in with certain intentions, like the thing that I was just telling you before, a lot of that comes from listening to Steve. So like on that level, I love talking with Steve, but then like, I love talking with, Daryl McDaniels, like, because Daryl McDaniels was like the first really big star that ever came into my office and just sat down and talked with me in my office when I had an office in New York. And his talking about being his comic book and how the character of DMC, was so, and it's just like, I was like, oh my God, like that changed how I saw them, or like, but then there's, I could keep going on. It's like, like talking to Lily Cornell Silver about being like, just a powerful mental health advocate, and seeing young people stepping up the way that she has and taking on like this very difficult issue where she doesn't have to. She's incredibly talented. She is doing a whole bunch of things. And so like I could honestly, I could go through almost every person that I've interviewed, and I could tell you in much more detail than I just did exactly why I loved talking with them. And for some reason, it doesn't really ever feel like, oh, this is my favorite. Like there's obviously like some people I just naturally like click with, or maybe I've known, longer. And so you like Darryl McDaniels, like this point, there's like, we've talked a whole bunch of times. And so I feel so comfortable talking with him, and I always enjoy, but there's just, I mean, honestly, like I can't, with a couple of exceptions, like I can't think of anyone where I just didn't come out being like, that is really cool,
Yeah.
And that's what I love about doing it. Like I love, I love the fact that every time I go in an interview, I'm like almost guaranteed that I'm going to come out with something, ranging from pretty cool to like life-changing cool.
Yeah.
I hope that gets conveyed a little bit. I hope, people feel that way at least somewhat. So, I know that was a long-winded and
no. You and I are on the same plane of existence, because I tell you, before every single episode of the podcast, I'll be sitting behind my little desk here, have a little bit of a knot in my stomach. I'm nervous. I'm about to talk to somebody, and we might get into some deep shit. It might be some flaccid shit. Who knows? Right. But I guarantee you, after every single episode, I run upstairs and I tell my wife, that was the best episode I've ever done. Every single episode, man. And so people ask me, they're like, so what's your favorite episode of your podcast you've done so far? And I've only been doing mine for, not quite a year, maybe 9 months now. But I say that's like asking me to pick which one of my kids is my favorite child. Yeah. I'm going to give you a different answer, a different day of the week. Of course I've got a favorite child, but no, I'm not going to let anybody know that.
I mean, of course, that's just silly to think otherwise.
but in all seriousness, I get exactly where you're coming from. There were some people when I was looking through your list and a couple of your episodes that I've listened to that are just like, man, this is my shit. This is my tribe, So it's very apparent to me why your subject of choice generally is musicians.
It kind of fell in that way for the podcast. I don't know, quite frankly, that it's going to be that way forever.
Right.
I think that because in when I was doing the blog for Psychology Today, there was a little bit more. I mean, it was mostly musicians, but we did athletes and actors and activists, and I think that for whatever reason, I think just my love of music has made it. I think we just wanted to, at the beginning, keep it a little bit more uniform. But I do think that one of the things that we're going to probably be doing after this season, we're going to take a break and reorg things in terms of like how we want to do it. But I have a feeling we'll be looking at, other genres of people, if you will. Right. Just because the goal is to, again, we want everyone to look in and, say like, well, there's like my favorite musician, there's my, maybe there's my favorite actor, there's my favorite athlete, there's like my favorite politician even, and having just, you want to get hit as many areas so that everyone feels like they've got something that they can hang on to that lets them think like, hey, maybe I can do what I want in my life. And, that's obviously that's a tall order, but it's definitely the mission, if you will.
Yeah. I get that. Pulling the curtain back a little bit more with how I landed here is I haven't played in a band for 10 years now. My very last show was opening a big festival for Avenged Sevenfold and 3 Days Grace, and the last band I was in. And I found myself walking around that venue, and it was a big outdoor show. And I said, I think this is the biggest it's ever going to get for me. And I've been doing it for superficial reasons for a little while now. It started off pure, it started off artistic, but it ended up in a very like superficial place where I was kind of becoming a ghost and a shell of my former self. And I said, this is the time, this is the right place to walk away from this. So I haven't done this for 10 years. I haven't done music for 10 years. And I have a group of friends that I created on Facebook, and it's just a bunch of dudes that are like dealing with being in our late 30s, early 40s, mid 40s, early 50s. And we just kind of all talk about this type of shit. And it's just like, these are the roads we've traveled on. And of course, a lot of them are musicians. So, when the pandemic had hit its height, I was like, man, now I'm starting to miss having a creative endeavor again. Maybe I'll start a podcast. And that's kind of how I ended up where I was. And getting to this long-winded diatribe to a conclusion here.
God, long-winded. Do you hear how I talk? That was like nothing. That was
like... I kind of resolved myself to the fact, and I'm talking to this group of guys, and I was just like, I think I'm going to start a podcast. And they're like, so what's your topic going to be? What's your podcast going to be about? Because it's not going to do shit if you don't have a singular focus. And I'm like, no, that's the point. I don't want to have a singular focus. I think the easy default for me would be dial up all my old musician friends, reconnect with all these big connections I made over 20 years of playing in rock bands, and just have music be my default. But realistically, if I want to really, because I think self-development is ultimately become my theme of my podcast. But ultimately, I need to challenge myself. I need to talk to people outside of, where my comfort zone is. So that's, man, you and I are on similar planes of existence, brother.
We're a couple of mics in like different, parts of the country, bringing it together.
Two mics on a Monday night.
You're wearing a hat, so I didn't know if it's a couple of bald mics, but I know one. Oh, look at that. Look at that angry head of hair, like just taunting me.
Two mics on a Monday night, man. So what's the most important thing that you've learned in your life?
I will tell you, like, one of the things that I don't know if this is the most important thing, but I know it's probably the most consistent with what all this that we've been talking about. I don't think that I ever recognized how much people just want to love and be loved. And I don't mean love like romantic, like love in the context of like love, like just everything, like from the moment you get up in the morning, are you loving yourself? And I don't mean love in that, like in the same way, like the positive versus negative. Like, I don't mean like being like, I love myself. I mean, if that's you, that's great. But more of like a love, like in kind of like a kindness, like being like, what I'll often say to my patients is like, I don't need you to love yourself. I don't need you to be like overly positive. I think I just need you to be like basically fair to yourself, though. Be basically kind to yourself. So if you're like, like a working, single parent, and you're struggling with depression, and you're raising a kid, and you're just like, I'm a total loser. It's like, back up like for a second. If a third person came in and referred to you as a loser, and I was able to witness that, like we would have a problem. I was like, I don't need you to be like, say you're the greatest thing in the world, but don't call yourself a fucking loser. You know what I mean? And I take that I have a problem with, not because it's pessimistic, because I'm like, just be fair. You know what I mean? Like if you're like, hey, I drink too much, I'm not going to be like, don't say you drink too much. Like, yeah, okay. You drink too much for your goals. So I think that one of the things that I've been learning recently is how, and this is a principle, I think, of humanistic psychology, is just like how much people just want to love and be loved, but how many things get in the way of that simple two-way process. And I think that like recently I've been thinking a lot about asking myself, in terms of almost everything that I do, is this loving? Or is this like loving? And am I loving others, including myself? And am I allowing love to come in? And I think that when I look at the world in that simple way, it's amazing how much, at least for myself, like I don't do that. And that's probably for me, at least recently, like probably like, the number one thing that I would say that I've learned is that like reducing these theoretically complicated concepts into very simple. Like, there's nothing more practical than a good theory. And people think, oh, it's all theoretical. It's like, no. Like if I can go into every situation being like, am I being loving? Am I like loving? Like am I loving my house by like taking care of it? Am I loving my wife and my kids by being kind to them? Am I loving my friends? Am I loving my music or martial arts? Or like, am I loving my practice? Like, the podcast, am I giving it love in a way? It doesn't mean I have to give it my all or whatever, but it might be basically being kind. Am I basically being compassionate? Am I basically being understanding and trying to move forward and allowing people to do that with me? That is probably, maybe I'll think of something else like, 10 minutes later, but that's probably the biggest thing that I've been focusing on. That is, to me, it's such a simple truth, but it's not how I've lived my life. And in looking at that, I think a lot of my regrets are around not just approaching it that way. Because I think that when I pull it back, I'm like, I kind of like doing that. I don't know if I ever gave myself like the chance to really like, because, a lot of things get in the way, like shame gets in the way, insecurity gets in the way, aspirations get in the way, all these kinds of things. And sometimes if you reduce it like that, that's probably I don't know, it's again long-winded, but that's probably like the number one thing I've learned.
Yeah, I not to go back on the whole pessimistic optimistic thing, is more of a positive to come from the COVID-19 thing. Is I think we're living through a renaissance of growth mindset with people, and there's a renaissance of self-actualization where people are kind of starting to and this goes back to the beginning of the podcast, where we talk about people being transparent about their mental health and realizing, it, it might be biochemical, but they can influence how they practice self-care and, like you said, love themselves and appreciate themselves, if you will, in a certain way.
Yeah, I mean, I think like even again when I say loving, the appreciation even gets a little tricky because it's again, I think that there's a lot of pressure on people to feel a certain way about themselves, which I think actually it gets disconnected, because I think a lot of people, as an example, most people assume that like self-hatred causes depression. And I think that
Right.
as an example, depression causes self-hatred because people are they're just really, really upset that they can't mobilize their mood the way that they see other people doing. And I think that there's just like, God, why can't I, and it hurts physically and that kind of stuff. And so I always like say, when you say like appreciate yourself and whatever, there's always the risk that comes across as tone deaf a little bit.
Yeah.
And so it's not saying that the way you were saying it was, but like I think that I'm always careful about that. And saying to people as an example, like, you have to be able to validate if somebody has like biological something, let's say depression or addiction. It's like how difficult that is.
Sure.
That being said, again, if you're going to be loving, that's the way I like as an example. I think it's loving to validate something like that, to understand it. I don't think it's loving to be like, oh, but it'll be okay, because it's like, well, it's okay for you because you don't have depression, or if you did, you wouldn't say something like that. Not you personally,
Right.
say something like that. And but then it's also loving to be like, listen, now that we've established that, we want to give you the best chance of managing it. Like you say to someone, look, you got diabetes. Like there are certain things that you now have to do, or certain things that you can't do that other people could get away with. Some people can go down to the candy store and just have whatever they want. You unfortunately can't do that. But let's give you the best chance by doing so I like with every single person I work with, one of the first things I say is, until you're sleeping well, eating well, exercising, and you're basically have taken substances out of your life, I don't really even know what you're about. I don't know what you can do, because so many of the problems that we have come from one of those four things. And so, to me, that's a kindness, like be nurturing yourself and but it's not necessarily positive in the classic sense. It's just kind of a recognition, like, hey, if you sleep more, look at how you sleep, and do you feel better? Some people are like, no, I don't. It's like, all right, well, that's different. But most people are like, yeah, I'm less anxious. Most of the people who come to me with panic attacks, their first panic was when they were hungover.
Right.
And it's like, because they were just like, what the hell is this feeling? And so, it's like that, those kindnesses, if you will, not loving of yourself is not always positive, unfortunately, but it doesn't have to be.
What's next for Dr. Mike?
Well, we're gonna finish up this season. We got some cool people. Depending on when this is coming out. We got George Clinton of Parliament Funkadelic coming up, and Vernon Reid of Living Color, and we've got Linda Perry. So we definitely got some guests that I'm psyched about. And then I think towards the end of the summer, I think we're gonna take a break. We're actually gonna build up our online coaching program, because right now, one of the things that my wife and I work on Hardcore Humanism together as partners, and she does mostly everything, but like she produces the podcast, she built our website, she edits all of our articles and helps with content. And so one of the things that she was pointing out is that we've got a lot of the podcast and the articles coming up, but there's not as much. I do our program with my patients or my clients, but we don't have as much online in that way. And so I think that probably what we're going to be spending the next year doing is really getting all of the actual, like you said, the self-development stuff on our website to be accessible in different ways, whether it's through seminars or videos or, forums. Like there's a whole bunch of things that we're going to do. So, I think we're going to reconceptualize how we do hardcore humanism as a podcast, and then really build that other stuff up so that hopefully people can make the connection and say like, oh, this is why we're doing, like, we can really like walk people through like, here's what the hardcore humanism philosophy and program is, and here's how we want to illustrate that in these amazing people who have done all these wonderful things, who have not because they've gone through the program. It's not like, oh, this is someone who did. It's not that at all. It's like we're learning from them and hopefully like, giving that to you. It's not like they are like, oh, look how great they are because they did hardcore humanism. They were great on their own. And now we're kind of, again, in the process of learning from them. And so, that's going to be cool. And we're going to be doing another podcast with Consequence of Sound called Going There, which in our second season, which is much more about music and mental illness. Hardcore humanism touches on that a lot, but it hits some other areas as well. It's much more, like you said, like self-development in general, whereas Going There is really, really about like artists talking about mental illness. And so we're going to be continuing doing that, and just working with people, and climbing out of the pandemic. I'm looking forward to going back to shows and starting doing jiu-jitsu again, and just like seeing people. And you and I were talking beforehand, like we want to get out to parts of the country that we haven't spent as much time in. You and I were talking about Nebraska, because we definitely want to hit there. And so we're looking forward to trying to stay safe while opening up a bit, living with purpose, I guess.
So what's going to be your first show back? Like what's the first concert you're going to go to when you can?
Well, I mean, we've been going to shows.
Oh, gotcha.
Outdoor hardcore. Well, just started. We went to 2 outdoor hardcore shows. One that was in Jersey and one that was in New York. And so that we've already, I guess, technically started back. I'm not sure what the first, and I'm gonna go to outdoor, probably outdoor shows throughout the summer. I actually don't know what the first indoor show that I'm gonna, because there's a lot of shows that I had tickets for that are now coming back. Like I know Ministry, when I interviewed Al Jorgensen, like Ministry's coming. And we interviewed Dirty Honey. They're coming around with actually that's outdoors, coming around with the Black Crows. There's a lot of metal festivals that I 100%, but the Black and Blue Bowl that we were supposed to see had all the New York hardcore bands, and we didn't see them indoors. So I actually, that is a great question. I don't know indoor, but outdoor, we're pretty much going to be, hitting as many as we can, as often as we can.
Awesome. Well, hey man, thank you very much for doing the podcast. I appreciate you, man. It's been a great honor.
Yeah, dude. Thanks so much. It was great talking, and thanks for having me on. It's fantastic.
True story. I had every single intention of letting sleeping dogs lie and leaving this episode to edit tomorrow. I was so excited after this episode was done that I got it all done within 2 hours, and I didn't rush. I enjoyed every single moment. So thank you very much, Dr. Mike. You can find Dr. Mike's podcast, Hardcore Humanism with Dr. Mike, on all of your favorite podcasting platforms. And give him a follow on social media if you can find him. Speaking of social media follows, give me a follow on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok by looking for Caught on the Mic with Michael Clark. And as always, I ask for that 5-star review on whatever podcasting platform you're using. This has been Caught on the Mic with Michael Clark. I'm Michael Clark. Until next time, thank you.